Hello, cohort 3, and Dr. Jenkins. This is my presentation on the state standard comparisons, and I have chosen the content Human Anatomy and Physiology because I was most interested in learning about what other states said about the course that I teach, and I am comparing Georgia, Florida, and California. I have taught in Georgia and in California, and would someday maybe like to move to Florida when I retire and possibly teach there later on. So the main difference is just looking overall at all three of them. Georgia has state standards for Georgia schools only. They do have a specific section on human anatomy and physiology, which is pretty detailed. California follows the NGSS, which is the National Science Standards, but it only has standards for life science and within that, a small section for the human body. And then Florida kind of does their own little thing called the Next Generation Sunshine Standard, so NGSSS, and it is specific for Florida schools only, but they do have some very specific standards for the human body, but they put it under the big category of life science. So I just wanted to show a few things that Georgia has for their standards. There are 5 standards for human anatomy and physiology. They start with some very broad terms that also seem to show up in the other states with main science skills like, evaluating, communicating, just overall structures. So anatomy, developing models, okay, very broad. Relationships between body structures and functions. So literally that just is defining like the course anatomy and physiology. But then if you go down to SAP2, there are some somewhat specific standards based on different body systems. So B over here, B, develop and use models that relate to the skeletal system, movement, protection, and support. So that's somewhat specific. And then over at D, they add the integumentary system, which is your skin, the skeletal muscular system, and then how do those 3 support, protect, and move. Now, the way I actually teach this course is each one of those has their own 3-week section. So in 3 weeks, I'm covering standard SAP2D, which seems kind of silly. For the third standard in Georgia, you can see that it's covering endocrine system, nervous system, but the function or the actual specific standard is ask questions to investigate how the nervous system supports information, detecting, interpreting, and responding. Well, that's very, very broad, except for the specifics of including the nervous system's function. And then for the endocrine system, they put some details about hormones, maintaining internal environment. And what I like that Georgia added just recently is a clarification statement in some of their sections where they do give some more specifics. Like the students need to be able to know what a negative feedback mechanism or feedback loop is. So go over heart rate, blood sugar, childbirth, temperature, growth. So those are specifics that I cover that in the old standards from 2006, these standards were updated in 2019, were not included. For the fourth standard, this is covering 4 body systems: cardiovascular, respiratory, digestive, and urinary. And I put somewhat specific for these standards. So SAP 4A right here is to talk about obtaining oxygen, transporting nutrients, removing waste. Great. Those things need to be discussed. Urinary system derives energy and eliminates waste. And then some broad points that they, share. Students should be able to, ask questions about interdependence, the interdependence of cardio, respiratory, urinary, and digestive. That kind of leaves the teacher open for cover whatever you want. Questions should address homeostatic mechanisms. So how do you stay in balance? How does the body stay in balance? Meaning, how are you not going to get diseases? What's going to happen when you age? What are some disorders? So the moral of the story here, especially with wrapping it up with the reproductive system, is that there is a lot of room for the teacher to do what they want. Okay. So, hey, teacher, just make sure that you talk about in the reproductive system how egg and sperm, make fertilization and then develop offspring. I mean, that is very, very broad. So my takeaways kind of from all of this is that the standards do say, hey, you need to cover these body systems. There are some specific vocabulary included. And I do like that they added the clarification statements so that educators kind of, especially if you were new to anatomy, teaching it, that you would have some idea of what you need to cover in the section. But this offers a lot of leeway. I put some leeway, but really it offers a lot of leeway for teachers to add their own specific content for human anatomy and physiology. So I think we talked about this before, that standards are like a backbone, like a vertebrae, if we're going to talk about anatomy, for the curriculum. So it gives you like a starting block, but it leaves a lot of space for teachers to teach what they want. Now, this, I think, is very broad compared to biology standards, which have an assessment exam. There is no assessment for the human body. There may be a couple of questions on the end of course test in biology, which covers, a very small little section on the human body and body systems. For California, I started my teaching career in California. My first year teaching, I taught human anatomy and physiology, and the standards have changed since 2000 when I taught there. So they start their whole standards with life science. And then I put this as number 8 because of the biology standards, number 8 and number 9 focus on coordinating structures and functions of organ systems. Okay. So there's only 2 standards under their big category of life science or biology because they also test on that. So 2 standards that cover the human body. So a lot of these are somewhat specific, and I put somewhat specific because they do include like very specific things like nutrients and toxic waste, like carbon dioxide. So they give a specific. Then number 2, nervous system. Number 3, nervous and endocrine with those feedback loops again. So I'm seeing a trend here. They want all students should know about these feedback loops. For the nervous system, number 4, to how the neurons transmit electrical impulses. That's specific, and that wasn't included in the other ones. So that is something that they need to know. And then 5 gets even more specific: sensory neurons, interneurons, motor neurons. That wasn't included in Georgia. Do we cover that as an anatomy teacher? Would you know to do that? It's kind of standard. But again, if you hadn't taught it, would you know that you need to include that? For number 9, this is when they focus on organisms having a variety of mechanisms to combat disease. So they're using this big category of, okay, now let's talk about the different body systems that protect us and fight disease. So this is where the skin comes in. And they said skin instead of integumentary system, which is interesting. So not very specific. I put broad. Antibodies, fighting infection, vaccines, bacteria and viruses, immune system. Now, and then number 6, they do get specific on which white blood cells you need to talk about, but there's a lot of body systems not covered. So they clearly do not have, very specific state standards for human anatomy. So my takeaway for this is the subcategory for physiology is 2 standards only devoted to the human body, includes a few topics for major body systems, but opens the door for a lot of teacher input in what they can cover. For Florida, like I love how Florida takes a little bit of everybody and makes their own like national standards, but just for Florida. So they call it the NGSSS. Now, one of the things I love about Florida is that when I went to their website to find, their standards, when you go to their standards and you look at, I put all this stuff on the screen, they have so much information for teachers to use. So it's not just the standards, but they're like, hey, here's how you're going to give a benchmark test for the students. Here's some related courses for it. Here's a tutorial you can give your students. Here's the lesson plan for covering this. Here's some student resources. So they give a whole bunch of stuff for the new teachers in the content area to use. So I really, really like that about Florida, especially I know that for the course anatomy and physiology, a lot of times teachers are thrown into that class because maybe there's only 1 or 2 sections of it. And the teacher's like, well, what do I do with this? What do I teach? So Florida definitely has a great outline. Now they don't have a ton of standards though for human anatomy and physiology, but what they do have is pretty pretty specific. So classifying state defining characteristics of epithelial tissue. This is the first one that actually went into specific tissue types. So for me, I just finished histology in my class, and this is exactly what I covered. I covered epithelial tissue, connective tissue, muscle tissue, and nervous tissue. And this is the first place that actually has that detail that I would need as a teacher to cover. And I did. And so yay, Florida for that part. My takeaways is that each standard has a link to multiple resources, and I love that. This is great for new teachers. I do, their next generation sunshine, that's what the extra S stands for, is under biology 1, and they do their assessments for that. Has similar detailed content as Georgia for the human body, but they go a step further. Concerning is the fact that the adoption or revision it said 208. Now, I don't know if that is February 8th, which I doubt. I believe it's like 2008. So there has not been an update since 2008. And I think that's a little too long to not go back and revise this. So the geographical divisions for human anatomy and physiology, the takeaways that I got from comparing all three is that Georgia is a state-only standards, Florida is state-only standards, but California is national. So they follow the national science standards. And I wonder if politics play a role, okay, that state-only versus national. And when you look at the three, and you look at our, political outlook, liberal versus very conservative. It's interesting that the very conservative states, their standards are only for their state, whereas a more liberal state, they follow the broad standards for the nation. For Georgia, there's no state assessment for human anatomy, only a biology end of course test. For Florida, no state assessment for anatomy, only an end of course NGSSS for biology 1. And California does something different. They have a CAST exam, and that is a science exam, and that's done in grades 5 and 8. And then once in either grade 10, 11, or 12 when they take their biology. When they take a biology class, an end of course test. And they did have specific testing windows. So that must be fall within the available statewide testing window, which is January 10th through the 17th for 2023. So my conclusion is that most states do not have specific standards for human anatomy and physiology, but if they do, it's usually under life science, the big category, or biology. And I wonder, should every course have a component on the statewide assessment? So, our state assessment is in science is only biology. Okay. So why only biology? Is that the only important science out of all of them? Shouldn't there be one state assessment for science that has a little bit of each of the science courses in it? Should it? I don't know. That's my question. And then how can we compare learning outcomes across the United States when each state has their own uniquely defined state standards? So are assessments, therefore, truly standardized? We cannot compare Georgia to Florida to California because the goal and the outlook for each of these states, what the kids are supposed to learn for each of the subjects is different. So how can how can we compare Georgia to Florida on a state assessment? Because it is not national. The standards are not national. And if they're not, how can we do a full comparison? So thank you guys so much. I hope you all have a great rest of your class. Sorry, I'm not here, but I will see you guys next time. Bye.